Days of pain in the Holy Land, as another sad, violent and bloodied page in history is turned. At our microphone, the Apostolic Nuncio, Archbishop Antonio Franco. The Holy Land awaits the fraternal support of the Universal Church. The letter of Cardinal Sandri on the Good Friday collection. A group of young Japanese, guests of the John Paul II Foundation, has been in the Holy Land to see its beauty and its contradictions. The first Lenten Franciscan pilgrimage to Dominus Flevit, the site of Christ's tears over Jerusalem. The Feast of St. Joseph in Nazareth, where the possible remains of his house are preserved. At the Monastery of the Temptation, the place which commemorates the 40 days which Christ spent in the desert. Dead and wounded in Jerusalem and Gaza, we are experiencing days of pain here in the Holy Land. Increased tension between Israelis and Palestinians has meant that death is sown on both sides. Alas, hatred and fear inspire violence and revenge. The Church in the Holy Land is following these events with concern, and in the words of the Apostolic Nuncio, Archbishop Antonio Franco, our thoughts and prayers are first concerned with the innocent victims and their families.
Innocent victims of situations which should certainly be resolved and demand commitment for this, but certainly they are not going to be resolved through violence and the death of innocent people. And my prayers are first and foremost for all victims, but also to the Lord so that He might enlighten, and I ask Him to prevent a further cycle of violence, leading to even greater tragedy and suffering.
It did no good to heed alarmist attitudes and despair, even if these were normal reactions, Archbishop Franco continued. But we had to recognize reality.
And reality demands a responsible commitment from everyone. Situations involving injustice and tension cannot last long, because before long somebody decides to send a message, a signal, using unacceptable methods. They require the goodwill of all concerned and the commitment of all, from those directly involved and from the international community.
The Holy Land awaits the fraternal support of the Universal Church and would like to reciprocate by sharing with it the grace and pain which characterized his way. Leonardo Cardinal Sandri, prefect of the Congregation for the Oriental Churches, expressed this sentiment on March the 21st in his letter addressed to all pastors in the Universal Church concerning the traditional Good Friday collection. In his message, the Cardinal notes that the Eastern churches are experiencing martyrdom and are suffering from instability and the absence of peace, the most worrying result of which is their steady exodus. Some positive aspects are insufficient to reverse this sad trend of Christian emigration, which saps the area of vital force for younger generations, he said. For this reason, Cardinal Sandri underlines the duty of everyone to join Pope Benedict XVI in encouraging Christians in Jerusalem, as well as Israel and Palestine as a whole, in Jordan and in other neighboring countries, never to simply adjust themselves to a failure of peace. The Pope had continued by saying that peace is possible, peace is urgently required. The Good Friday collection, a tradition that goes back to the early Church, is an initiative which begins with Lent and finds its fulfillment on Good Friday. It is an ordinary yet indispensable way in which to safeguard the life of Christians in this beloved land in which Jesus was born, continues the Cardinal, who also recalls that the Pope invites us to go beyond gesture to provide concrete help. And he quotes from the post-synod exhortation Verbum Domini to say, "The more we see the universality and the uniqueness of the person of Christ, the more we value the land where Jesus was born, lived, and gave himself for all of us. The stones over which our Redeemer walked are filled with memory and continue to cry out the good news. Christians who live in the land of Jesus, witnessing by their faith in the risen Christ, are called not only to serve as a beacon of belief in the Universal Church, but also as a leaven of harmony, wisdom, and balance in the life of a society which has traditionally been and continues to be pluralistic, multi-ethnic, and multi-religious.
With an average age of a little more than 20, they have a keen wish to understand why this land has been unable to find peace. Guests of the John Paul II Foundation, a group of young Japanese, accompanied by their teachers, visit the Holy Land. In a week they have visited places and people, and have been able to empathize with the feelings of two people in conflict. And not only this, the many realities of Israel, in particular those concerning the holy places, inspired many questions. And from their faces it was easy to see that they were intrigued by a dramatic and paradoxical situation.
I didn't know that Jerusalem is so exciting place. It's the holy place for Christian and Jewish and Arab people. I didn't know it was so exciting. And
in the words of these young people, it was also possible to sense their emotion and involvement in the drama which is affecting Japan at this moment, a disaster which continues to claim victims.
We are so small. We cannot carry the cross of Christ. It's simply too heavy. He carries our cross for us. This is our belief. We cannot carry the cross which we have at present in Japan. It is also too heavy. By ourselves we cannot see a way out of this situation. Our strength is so slight, but he will do something.
Even if it was unspoken, it is possible to sense the effect of the pain and incredulity that has resulted in an event of such proportions, and perhaps one can detect a questioning of the sense behind injustice and suffering in life.
The liturgical calendar in the Holy Land is rich and intense. In the second week of Lent, pilgrimages to the holy places connected with the Passion and Death of Christ take place. This is a tradition that has been kept for many centuries by the Franciscans of Jerusalem, and it will reach a climax in Holy Week.
We are very fortunate in the Holy Land because we are able to follow Jesus in all the places which he knew and loved. In each of these places we can meditate on a particular event. It is a complete spiritual itinerary, and it can be summed up saying, "Here I have been able to see with my own eyes, and here I have touched things with my own hands."
The first such celebration is at Dominus Flevit, which means the Lord wept. This little sanctuary is situated on the western slope of the Mount of Olives. And this week welcomed local Christians and pilgrims for a Mass celebrated by Friar Narcisio Climas, who spoke in his homily of the tears of Christ.
He wept profoundly, and with his mind. His were not normal tears, but tears through which he saw his city. He wept because that city had not recognized him as a prophet, and so he said, "Jerusalem, Jerusalem, you who killed the prophets, one day not one stone will be left on another in you."
These Lenten pilgrimages, above all journeys of meditation, will take place each week and involve a different sanctuary, commencing this week at a place from which there is a breathtaking view of the Holy City, beloved by God, but which continues to be filled with contradictions and suffering. Indeed, about 2 hours before the beginning of this celebration, in another part of the city, a terrorist attack took place, making the name of this sanctuary all the more relevant. Dominus Flevit, the Lord wept, here, over Jerusalem, because it had not understood the way to peace.
These tears of Jesus continue to be shed today, and they are timely in that people continue to suffer. But until they are able to recognize him as the true Messiah, it will be difficult to proclaim the real cause of the difficulties of these days, of these years, in Jerusalem, in the holy city, in the city that is his. March 19th, the feast of St. Joseph of Nazareth, the city of the Holy Family, and therefore also of he who, according to biblical quotation and popular devotion, is called the just and faithful man whom God chose as the custodian of his house. Each day thousands of pilgrims come from many parts of the world to find traces of his important yet discreet presence. A few meters from the Basilica of the Annunciation is a church dedicated to St. Joseph and linked with a unique complex of subterranean caves, the remains of a first-century village. This sanctuary was built at the beginning of the 20th century over the foundations of a Crusader church, and in the crypt are preserved the remains of what are thought to be the workplace and the house of St. Joseph. It is a place that has been venerated since the early Christian centuries, keeping alive a story which has been told over the centuries through archaeology and art. St. Joseph's was a simple life, yet completely immersed in the plans of God. Today, Nazareth has a population of 70,000.
The Latin community is the most numerous, with 7,000 Christians. One might not consider this very large, yet it is larger than the Latin communities in Jerusalem and Bethlehem.
The Feast of St. Joseph is celebrated by local Christians and pilgrims, and begins with the solemn entry of the custodian of the Holy Land, Friar Pier Battista Pizzaballa, and a procession along a new pathway that leads to the Basilica of the Annunciation. For this year, because of a large number of participants, the Mass was celebrated in the Basilica. Following the Mass, the faithful process to the grotto for a veneration of an icon of St. Joseph. Silence and contemplation, and a little later, as takes place every Saturday, a candlelight vigil in the courtyard of the Basilica, followed by a procession through the streets of the city animated by hymns and the recitation of the Rosary in various languages. Then one last moment of prayer, and the final blessing at the grotto. The faithful then awaited an even greater feast, the Solemnity of the Annunciation on March 25th, a very important day for the Christians of Nazareth as well as for visiting pilgrims. On that day the people were again united in prayer at this place, which was a silent witness of Mary's yes.
The 40 days of Lent recall the time spent by Jesus in the wilderness, traditionally in the Lower Jordan Valley, a mere 50 minutes by car from the centre of Jerusalem. Clinging to a sheer cliff face on the edge of the Judean plateau overlooking Jericho, the Greek Orthodox Monastery of the Temptation commemorates the trials which Christ underwent during his period of fasting in the desert. Jesus was tempted here in the desert to use his miraculous powers for his own ends by turning stones into bread, but told his tempter, "Man does not live by bread alone, but on every word that comes from the mouth of God." Although a climb up the cliff face is not too taxing, a recently installed cableway makes it easy for the pilgrim to reach a point just below the monastery with ease. Surprisingly, some of the sounds of life in Jericho can be heard up here, but the silence in the monastery aids the monks in their prayer and invites the pilgrim to sense that solitude through which he can look into his soul with the eyes of God. For the pilgrim, this opportunity is all too brief, but valuable nevertheless. Now under the jurisdiction of the Palestine National Authority, the first monastery was built here by the Byzantines in the 6th century, in the belief that Jesus spent his prayer and fasting in a cave at the site. And the present monastery was built in 1895 by the Greek Orthodox Church around the same cave that had inspired their Byzantine predecessors. Known to Palestinians as Quruntul Jabal, the Mount of the 40 Days, it is a feature of the desert which might aid the pilgrim to sense that Lent is enshrined here, and inspire him or her to create some space, physically and spiritually, in which, as the liturgy says, to hasten towards Easter with the eagerness of faith and love.